This is Trunk Nation with Eddie Trunk.
On volume, Sirius XM 106.
We're back. We're live on Trunk Nation, Sirius XM 106 volume, your place to talk rock music Monday through Friday, 9 to 9, God forbid, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a to 1 p. Pacific. Replay every night, 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern, always available on demand on the Sirius XM app. A lot of stuff going on today, Alex. A lot of busy stuff going on. We have the coffee cup missing conspiracy throughout the building. We got the big snowstorm coming, and the snow apocalypse is going to shut down the world for the next 2 days. Everybody's scrambling for that. We got guests in town that may or may not be coming in. A lot going on. But Greg Prato is here.
Finally, we get to meet face-to-face.
Yes. Good to see you, Greg.
Good to finally meet you.
Greg is a great journalist. I really enjoy your work, and you've been nice enough to have me in some of the many books you've written and talk to me for them.
Right.
And you have a brand new book called Shredders, which is a really amazing piece of work. I mean, it is incredibly in-depth. It's really cool looking, cool photos, great photo of Eddie Van Halen on the cover.
Yes.
And Shredders, the oral history of speed guitar and more, with a foreword by Alex Lifeson and afterword by Uli John Roth. So you have tackled a lot of subjects in your journalism career in rock music. Every sort of thing from... Talk about some of the books you made. I know the Scorpion, the German metal book, right?
Right.
The Scorpions one.
Well, I was thinking,
recent.
I interviewed you, I think, for 6 of my books so far. I've interviewed you for the Eric Carr story. That was the first one.
Right.
I interviewed you for Survival of the Fittest, heavy metal in the 1990s.
Right.
I interviewed you for Iron Maiden 80-81.
Right. Early days of Maiden.
Right.
Yeah.
I interviewed you for Scott Weiland, Memories of a Rock Star.
Yeah. Did that come out yet?
Yes, that came out a while back. I'm pretty sure I sent you a copy.
Okay.
Maybe I got lost in your library.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know if I got that one.
All right. And I also I interviewed you for German Metal Machine, Scorpions in the 70s.
You know who loved that book?
Who?
Kirk Hammett.
He wrote the foreword for that.
Oh, he did?
Yes.
Because he texted me a picture of that book, and he's like, bro, did you see this? Because he's way into Schenker and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And then I also interviewed you for the Rainbow book, which is... The Other Side of Rainbow.
Right.
That was the most recent.
So how many books have you written on rock music in your career so far? What's the total number?
Well, it's 21 total, but 4 of them have been on sports. I did a book about the Jets called Sack Exchange, a book about the Mets called The Seventh Year Stretch, a book about the Yankees called Just Out of Reach, and a book about the New York Islanders called Dynasty. So that's 4 minus 21 is what, 17?
Wow.
So
17 books on
17
rock.
books on rock.
What was your very first one?
A Devil on One Shoulder and an Angel on the Other, the story of Shannon Hoon and Blind Melon.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was the first one.
And what, for you as a journalist, what is the catalyst for what you decide that you want to write on? Is it that you're personally a fan, or you just think, or does that not matter so much that it's just got to be a great story?
No, I'm lucky that every single book I've ever done has been on a topic that I was a fan of.
So were you a big Blind Melon fan?
Huge fan. Humongous fan of Shannon Hoon. I think he's criminally underrated. Anyone listening who may just know Blind Melon because of No Rain should really check out the album Soup that came out in 1995. That's one of my favorite albums of all time. Very underrated album. And it's really a shame because I think if they stuck together with Shannon Hoon, they would have been a very big band. Mm-hmm. I mean, even if they didn't... I know that album Soup wasn't a big hit as far as the charts, but I think they would have been a band that had a core following that would have followed them around, and they would still be touring today and putting out worthwhile albums with Shannon.
See, that's interesting because Blind Melon and Shannon Hoon were your sort of gateway in your first book, and a band and an artist you're very passionate about, but the bulk of your writing has been about heavy rock.
I listened to everything, but as a teenager, I was 100% heavy metal.
Yeah.
So like a lot of these books, like Eric Carr, Kiss was my favorite group when I was a teenager. So, I mean, that was like a no-brainer.
I thought that book was great, by the way. People that did not get that book from Greg, was it called, what was the subtitle? It was Eric Carr.
It was just called The Eric Carr Story.
The Eric Carr Story. And by all means, check that book out because there's some fairly explosive things in that book, too, as far as what people have said. There's been a lot talked about with Eric in his final years and his relationship with Kiss and how things went down. And there were a lot of people that were very transparent about that in that book. I think it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, as a fan, I didn't know all that stuff was going on behind the scenes with him when he was in bad health, like what was
Yeah.
going on, like, as far as the business. And that book, I think, to the best of my knowledge, has Bill Aucoin's last ever interview.
Oh, really?
I interviewed him just a few months before he passed away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And for people that, and in addition to writing your own books, you've been a contributing writer to a lot of things. Did
Right.
you write some stuff in Billboard, I think?
Yeah, I used to write for Billboard, used to write for Rolling Stone. Now I write for Vintage Guitar Magazine, Classic Rock, and also Team Rock. I recently interviewed you for that, for the top 5 or 10 albums.
10 albums,
Yeah,
which
that's
I
what-
made like 12 or 13 or something like that.
Right.
I pushed it to an extra 1 or 2.
Right.
But yeah, so needless to say, Greg is accomplished in the world of rock journalism, has written a bunch of great books and great stories. And his brand new one, like I said, is called Shredders, which focuses on speed guitar. Why this subject? How did this one come to you?
Well, growing up, I was a big fan and reader of books like Guitar World and also Guitar for the Practicing Musician.
Do you play?
Yes.
Okay.
I used to take lessons from John Petrucci for one summer.
Oh, okay.
Summer of 91. That was right when Dream Theater they just got their new singer, at the time the new singer, and they were working on Images and Words at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a great teacher. I have good memories of that.
He didn't like do all his crazy shit in front of you and like blow your head off, did he?
He was very, very complimentary too. But I remember being kind of self-aware of like what I was playing in front of him. But he was a great teacher. I have to give him props. for that. Yeah.
John's a great guy. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
imagine you sit down. Like I remember when I went to I was at Portnoy's house once, and he had all his drums in the basement. And at that point, his son was very young. His son Max now is in a band and is playing. He's probably 17 now, 16. But Max was probably 8 or 9. And I said to Mike, I said, what do you do with all these, you got a million drum kits down here. And he said, yeah, well, my son is starting to play. And I said, oh, that's cool. I said, do you teach him? He goes, no. He goes to a drum teacher down the street or whatever. And I was like, does the drum teacher know who his father is? Like, imagine that pressure.
Yeah,
like, you're trying to teach Mike Portnoy's kid, and then you got Mike Portnoy, evaluating the lesson.
Right. Yeah,
that would be brutal. That's what I
Pressure.
thought of with Petrucci, like him doing this crazy.
Yeah.
I know he doesn't, but
yeah.
So that's cool. So you got to take lessons from him, and that was your thing.
I took lessons from him, and I'm sure you remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, since there was no internet, we pretty much learned about all these artists and guitarists from reading these magazines and watching Headbangers Ball and all this stuff. So that was kind of like a golden era for me, learning about all these guitarists.
Right.
And then I have to admit, when grunge hit, I was totally smitten with Soundgarden, Nirvana, and Pearl Jam and all those bands. But I still, I never gave up my love for like Thin Lizzy and Van Halen, and Queen is my all-time favorite band. So, I never lost that. Mm-hmm. So just a few years ago, I just was wondering what all these guitarists that were featured in these guitar magazines back in the late 80s were currently up to. And that gave me the idea to do this book. So here we are with the book Shredders.
And the way you do your books, and most of them at least, and this one as well, is kind of, I think, interesting, and I actually really enjoy. You basically conduct a series of interviews and then let the artists actually tell the story. In other words, as far as your own sort of take on things and you let the artists speak. You just basically interview them and put and space things out throughout the story of the book. It's not,
Right.
You're not, in other words, your voice, Greg Prato, you're not jumping in all that much beyond setting the scene, really, right?
It's pretty much, I think my job as a reporter is to stay out of it as much and let the people that were actually there tell the story as it really happened. Mm-hmm. Me as a fan, of course, I could say, oh, well, the David Lee Roth Eat 'Em and Smile album was a great classic Shredder album, blah, 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 blah. But I wasn't there. I wasn't there when Billy Sheehan got the call from David Lee Roth, hey, I have a secret. Don't tell anybody. Van Halen's breaking up. Do you want to form a band? Like, I wasn't there for that.
Right.
But obviously Billy Sheehan was there, so let him tell the story.
Right.
And yeah, they call it the oral history format.
Okay.
Which is just quotes. So pretty much I like to describe it as a documentary, but in book form.
Yeah, I really like that format, and I like that you do that. I think it's really cool. I just imagine, though, that it's got to be a shit ton of work for you to transcribe all that stuff, and then also sort of figure out, you've got to tell the story in a linear sort of way.
Right.
So you've got to conduct all these interviews, and then you have to figure out how you're going to sort of piece everything together and tell the story. How time consuming is that?
Well, besides conducting the interview, probably the longest thing is transcribing the actual interviews, which I do all myself. So I have to do the interview, transcribe it, type it into a document. Then I have to find out the subject that it belongs to, and then fit it into that. And then I have to read back the book to make sure that it's not a topic that's been repeated
other
times. So yeah, it's definitely time consuming. But I'm lucky that this is my full-time job.
Right.
I don't have another job, so this is all I do.
Right.
Is just focus on doing phone interviews and editing and books.
Right. We're going to talk specifically about this book, Shredders, which, again, has just on the back of the book quotes from Kirk Hammett, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, George Lynch, Kim Thale from Soundgarden, and it is written by Greg Prato, who's here in the studio with me right now. It has a foreword by Alex Lifeson of Rush, which for a book called Shredders, you might find to be a little bit interesting because Alex is not, although a brilliant guitar player, not a guy you would think of in a capacity of being a shredder, but this actually this book really goes off in some different areas and includes people like that, which I think is really cool. So let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll dive into the world of shred guitar players. If you got some questions as well about the world of shred guitar playing and the book Shredders, you can call in at 844-686-5863, 844-6-VOLUME. It's Trunk Nation live until 4 p.m. Eastern. And we will continue talking to Greg. And then coming up about a half an hour from now, a guy also featured in the book, Dave Menichetti from Y&T, calls in live to talk about the passing of Y&T guitarist Joey Alves over the weekend. So much to do on this busy Monday. Eddie Trunk coming back talking shred guitar with Greg Prato next.
This is Trunk Nation with Eddie Trunk.
On volume, Sirius XM 106.
Life, liberty, and rock and roll. This is Trunk Nation with Eddie Trunk.
On volume, Sirius XM 106.
Busy Monday, and we are talking rock music with you as we do Monday to Friday here live on Trunk Nation from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Sirius XM 106 Volume. Talking with Greg Prato, writer of the book Shredders. Is the book out now? Can people buy it now, Greg?
It is coming out on the 15th, which is this Wednesday, and then I'm doing an appearance on the 16th at Sam Ash in Huntington, New York with Mark Wood, the heavy metal violinist.
Oh, yeah?
We're going to be talking about the book. I'll be signing it, and Mark is going to be doing a performance. He's played with Trans-Siberian Orchestra, Steve Vai, and a bunch of other artists. So that's the 16th, Huntington, New York, Sam Ash, 7 p.m., and the day before, the 15th, is when the book Shredders comes out.
So for people listening around the country, where's the best way to go and buy the book when Wednesday rolls around?
Amazon.com. I think you'd probably get it a day earlier if you order it through Amazon.com. Actually.
Okay. Yeah. And will it be in bookstores as well and the usual outlets also?
Yeah, it came out through Jawbone Press, the publisher. They put out the Max Cavalera book and also the Glenn Hughes book and the Cliff Burton book, a Randy Rhoads book, a bunch of good heavy metal type books.
Talk a little bit about Alex Lifeson writing the foreword, that decision, and how you reached out to him.
I interviewed Rick Emmett from Triumph for the book, and I've interviewed him several times over the years. In fact, in this current issue, the May issue of Vintage Guitar Magazine, I did a big feature on Rick Emmett, where you see all his guitars and stuff, which is pretty cool. And he gave me a nice interview for this book, and I know on his last album, which is called Res 9, I believe, Alex Lifeson appeared on that album.
Yep.
So I just emailed him because I had his email address, and I said, hey, Rick, would you mind maybe putting me in contact with Alex to see if he'd like to write this forward? And he said, sure, no problem. And he forwarded along the message, expecting to hear back through Rick. And then suddenly, late at night, one night, I get an email from Alex Lifeson, which was kind of surreal because I'm a huge Rush fan from back then. So that was kind of like a, pinch me type moment.
Yeah. Did he have an understanding of the book and what you were going for?
Yeah, I sent him a PDF file of the book before it was formatted or anything. He had the whole book, and he just read the text, and he really liked it a lot.
Yeah.
And, he did the forward, and then also Uli John Roth I'm friendly with from interviewing him for the Scorpions book called German Metal Machine, Scorpions in the 70s. And I interviewed him. It's coming up in a Vintage Guitar Magazine. He it's going to be a big feature coming up with him too. And he agreed to do the afterword, which was very nice of him as well.
Yngwie is scheduled to play here in New York tomorrow at BB King's, but if this snow comes, I don't know if he's getting in or that show's going to happen. But
right.
He's currently out on tour doing all the old Scorpion stuff. So for you, reading this book, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't get a chance to read all the way through, but I did get a chance to skim through it and get the tone of it.
Right.
It would seem to me that when you talk about shredders, which is what the title of the book is, there's three key figures, at least the way it goes into the book. And the first would be Eddie Van Halen. Would that be correct?
Of course, he's on the cover.
He's on the cover.
Right.
So, yeah. So did most of the people that you talked to, and you talked to a lot of guitar players, did they all pretty much reference back to Eddie and say he was the guy, so to speak?
What's interesting is the first chapter is called Pre-Shred, and I interviewed some of the people I spoke to for this book are Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Kirk Hammett. You mentioned Dave Meniketti from Y&T,
right.
Michael Schenker, a bunch of people. And what's interesting enough, when I asked them about shred guitar, like Joe Satriani said, well, you have to go back a bit. You can't just start with Eddie Van Halen. You got to go back to Jimi Hendrix. And then I interviewed a few other people like I forget some of the names right now, but anyway, like they said that, you also have to include people like Uli John Roth, Michael Schenker, of course. So it's not just starting with, I think, Eddie Van Halen. You have to go back a little bit, but it seems like Eddie Van Halen there was like a bomb that went off and suddenly everyone's two-hand tapping, everyone's painting their guitar, putting stripes on it, and there was a huge Van Halen copycat thing. So really, honestly, I would say Van Halen probably was the first true shredder type guitarist if I had to pick one. I mean, I'm a huge fan of also the guitarist named Tommy Bolin that not a lot of people know
right.
about. He did an album with Billy Cobham called Spectrum.
Right.
And there is a song called Quadrant 4, which is the fantastic, amazing guitar playing on that. And that to me is the bridge between Jimi Hendrix and also Eddie Van Halen, what he's playing. He's doing like insane like dive bombs with his whammy bar, and he's playing very fast, but also very tasteful. So I think if anyone listening to this is curious to hear about the stepping stone between Hendrix and also Eddie, I would say the Spectrum album by Billy Cobham.
Yeah, Tommy Bolin is a guy that has a really, really fanatical sort of cult fan base that really loves the work that he did. And whether, Tommy Bolin was probably best known as the guy who replaced Ritchie Blackmore in Deep Purple.
Also James Gang, he replaced
Joe Walsh.
Joe Walsh, yeah. And I also did a book. My second book was called Touched by Magic, the Tommy Bolin story.
Okay,
that was my second book,
so
yeah.
And then of course he did stuff with Billy Cobham. He did his own solo record, Teaser, and one others.
Private Eyes.
Yeah. But he's a guy that he's a guy whose name comes up a lot. Another guy I hear a lot about as far as a 70s guy that had a huge impact that I don't think is all that well known in America is Rory Gallagher.
Right.
He's a guy that like I asked the guys in Judas Priest and they worship Rory Gallagher.
Vivian Campbell is a huge fan. In fact, in the book Shredders, I spoke to Vivian Campbell for the book, and there's a little part where he talks about why he's such a special guitarist, Rory Gallagher.
Yeah, another guy as far as a 70s guy that people absolutely love that kind of falls in that category too is a guy like Frank Marino.
Right.
And people so those aren't household names, but they're guys that a lot of these guys that maybe you wrote about that gave you interviews for the book would reference. Like a guy like Zakk Wylde absolutely loves Frank Marino. There's
right,
a
exactly.
big influence on him.
Yep.
But really, if you trace the lineage of it, most consider Eddie Van Halen to be the godfather of shred, would you say?
He was, but what's interesting with him is when you think of shred, you maybe don't think of songwriting, but I mean, Eddie Van Halen is a fantastic songwriter if you think about all his songs. So he never, I think, put shredding in front of the importance of writing good music. And even his soloing is never just shredding for the sake of shredding. If you think about the song Ain't Talking About Love, that's a very simple, it's just like a melody he's playing. He's not playing 1,000 notes a minute.
Right.
So that's like really, I guess, my favorite type of guitar playing is guitarists that can kind of balance that really good songwriting with also really great guitar playing.
I agree. Me too, as well. Now, the next guy that in the hierarchy of this shred influence world that you write about in the book that comes up is Randy Rhoads.
Right.
So he would be the guy that that would kind of be next in line, so to speak, to lay the groundwork.
Right. Well, I think he is responsible for the introduction of classical into also heavy metal. So
right.
and of course there's the whole tragic element of him, like what would he have gone on to do because he was such a genius or just over those two albums. That's similar to Cliff Burton, like what would Metallica have done, what would Ozzy have done if he
right, it's such a small body of work, such a small sample of work, but the influence is incredible. Although I read forget what, but a few of the guitar players that you talk about or that you interview for the book during the Randy Rhoads section, they certainly don't. Correct me if I'm wrong, but a couple of the guys didn't necessarily diss him, but they just basically said, well, it was just maybe there wasn't enough to work off of there, or it wasn't that big of a thing to them. Do you recall that? I don't remember who actually said that.
Yeah, I think it was Steve Vai and maybe even George Lynch both said, he's obviously a classic. He's like a legend when it comes to guitar, but you can't really compare him so much to Eddie Van Halen because Eddie Van Halen has such a huge body of work.
Right.
Whereas Randy Rhoads, if you're also including, he had 2 Quiet Riot albums and also 2 Ozzy albums. Most people forget about the Quiet Riot and just focus on the Ozzy. So, but still, I don't know. I mean, I think that he is just it was as big an impact because if you think back to the early '80s, the majority of guitarists were just ripping off Van Halen with what they were doing. Randy Rhoads found a way to inject an interesting take on that. So I think he really needs to get a lot of credit for what he did and what he accomplished in that short period of time.
You talk about the body of work, though, when it comes to Randy Rhoads, and I brought this up the other day. I don't know what it was like. I know it was Eddie Van Halen's birthday or anniversary of some first record or something, some sort of landmark day. We do a lot of that here on this channel and show, and I brought this up. The body of work that Eddie Van Halen has given us is unbelievable and impactful as anything and all that. But if you think about it, especially in the last 20 years, it's been unbelievably limited.
It has.
Like if you look at I think we were talking about his birthday, and I think he was 65 or something like that. And we figured out that between 63, whatever he is now, 63, 64, whatever, between then and going back 20 years, which would have been him in his early 40s, he's only given us like 2 records.
Right.
Like the Van Halen 3 record, the last record with Sammy, and then the record with Roth, the most recent one, which was a bunch of old songs that we found out.
Right.
So if you think about it, what for most guitarists during what is like their most fertile, unbelievable period, it's kind of tragic that there's been so little output from him.
It is, but then if you think about kind of the other side of the coin, he's building a mystery. So it's kind of like there's a mysterious element, like what has he been up to for the past 20 years or whatever. And then I also know longtime Van Halen fans, such as myself, if you look at old interviews with him and also even Roth, they talk about song titles that never came out. So there has to be a whole backlog of music. I don't know how much finished or how finished these songs are, but my understanding is I think there's a lot of music that never came out that was recorded back in the day. So I don't know why they wouldn't do a box set or maybe.
I don't know. I mean, that's the Van Halen is. We talk about this all the time. It's such an enigma because you just don't know what's going on, and there's nothing but rumors and speculation, and they're very tight-lipped. But I think, I mean, listen, Eddie Van Halen doesn't owe us anything. He's given us unbelievable amount of stuff, even if it's all we ever get. But I think it's tragic that over last 20 years we've gotten so little from the guy in terms of released music. We got to go do a top-of-the-hour news flash. We're going to come back and we're going to reveal the third in the triumvirate of shred guitar players of note. Greg Prato's my guest. Shredders is the book. This is Trunk Nation, Sirius XM 106 volume. Coming right back.
One nation under Trunk. This is Trunk Nation with Eddie Trunk.
On volume, Sirius XM 106.
Talking rock music with you guys Monday to Friday, live 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time here on Trunk Nation. We are live for another hour on this Monday, Sirius XM 106 volume. Eddie Trunk joined by Greg Prato. The book is called Shredders. It's available everywhere starting this Wednesday. Get it at Amazon or wherever you buy books. And if you are on Long Island, you can meet Greg and get a copy of the book signed at, you said, Sam Ash?
Sam Ash in Huntington, New York at 7 p.m. on Thursday. And Mark Wood, the heavy metal violinist, will be also doing a performance that night.
Very cool. So the third guy that really the world of shred guitar, according to Greg's book and the people he talked to, is really built around would be Yngwie.
Right.
And that kind of makes a lot of sense because Yngwie was, and I guess you'd say chronologically too, the way we just did this with Eddie, Randy, and then Yngwie. But many, I'm sure, brought up Yngwie to you. And what was some of the common threads that you heard about Yngwie and the impact he had from talking to all these guitar players?
Well, he picked up on what Randy Rhoads was doing and took it to the 2000th degree. I mean, he just took what Randy Rhoads did and I mean, not that he was a Randy Rhoads clone. But he, was a merger of Randy Rhoads, Ritchie Blackmore, and also, of course, Uli John Roth. And he was definitely, he was, I guess, more technically gifted and also faster playing. And he, I guess he was Randy Rhoads on pretty much testosterone, you could describe him. I mean, I can't think of a better description than that when it comes to Yngwie Malmsteen.
As a guitar player yourself and as a fan of this stuff, what were your thoughts when you first heard Yngwie? Was it the first Steeler record where you heard him?
No, the first time I heard him was really the Marching Out album. I remember I was in the 7th grade at the time. This would have been in 1985, and I was definitely amazed. I was a huge fan as soon as I bought that album. In fact, I remember telling people in my hallway in my middle school that he was better than Eddie Van Halen. I wouldn't probably say that now, but back in 1985, that was a statement that actually came from Greg Prato's lips.
Well, listen, when Yngwie came out, I mean, it was mind-blowing to a lot of people. I heard him, the very first thing he did was the first Steeler record, and I heard him on that. I had that record. I'm 52, so I'm probably a little older than you. Mm-hmm. And I heard that record, and I was like, whoa. I mean, there were a lot of people with the Steeler record that thought that they sped up the tape or something. Like, how could this guy possibly be playing that quick? Yeah. But with Steeler, Yngwie had just come in. Mike Varney found him. Did you talk to Varney in the book?
Yes, I did. I interviewed Mike Varney. And the thing that you just said, which is interesting, I interviewed Kirk Hammett for this book, and he said what you just said. He was taking lessons from Joe Satriani at the time, and he got the demo of Yngwie Malmsteen. So this was before even Steeler. And he brought it to Satriani and said, could you show me this? But before you show it to me, just listen to it. And there was some talk like, is this maybe sped up? And then Joe Satriani was like, no, it's not sped up. He's really playing. So,
yeah, I mean, it was that crazy when people heard it. And listen, Varney himself probably, I mean, Varney is at the core of so many of these guys like Yngwie and Marty Friedman and Richie Kotzen and all these guys that are amazing players as well. But Mike Varney and Shrapnel and his column in the Guitar Magazine and all that stuff, I mean, he's pivotal in the world of shreds. So I'm sure he gave you a ton of stuff. I've been talking. Varney lives in Vegas now. I see him from time to time, and I've been talking to him about wanting to do something with him, whether on this show or podcast or whatever, because he would be a fountain of stories, and he produced a lot of the records as well.
Yeah, and he was interviewed extensively for this book, and he was the one that discovered Jason Becker, Marty Friedman, Greg Howe. It's just it's a list that, and of course, also Yngwie Malmsteen with Steeler.
Yeah, because the Steeler record came out on Shrapnel on Varney's label, and the thing with Steeler was that record was pretty much done, and Yngwie just came in and just did some mind-blowing solos, and that was it. I don't even know if they ever did live shows with Malmsteen. Did they?
I think they did. I think there's some footage on YouTube.
Yeah,
I think there is.
So and then Yngwie went to Alcatraz and then went and did his own thing, of course, which he still does to this day. And when you think about it, if you consider the holy trinity of the shred guitar players to be Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, Yngwie by far is the most active. I mean, sadly, Randy's dead.
Right.
Eddie Van Halen, we just talked about, largely inactive as far as recording and putting out new music for a long time.
Right.
So Yngwie is the guy that really is carrying the torch these days, it would seem.
From that trio, I guess you got to give it to him that he's still out there, he's still putting out albums, still touring.
Yeah, I mean, just announced a tour, and I see him all the time. The other people that Greg talks to in this book, just what I think was really interesting about what you did here, Greg, is that you talk to people and get their perspectives on shred guitar playing that necessarily wouldn't be in that world, like Steve Hackett.
Right.
You talk to in here. Bruce Kulick from Kiss talked about him coming into Kiss and kind of having to try to fit that mold of what was going on a little bit.
Right.
I noticed a quote from him about that.
But the thing with shred guitar, the beginning of the song "No No No" from the Kiss album "Crazy Nights," that's a total shred guitar solo right there. Yeah,
totally. I think that was a sign of the times of people really saying we have to kind of. I think what happened was a lot of '70s bass bands felt a great pressure to say, okay, we have to keep up with what's going on in the '80s.
Bon Jovi. Right? Kiss tried to be Bon Jovi and also Def Leppard in the 80s, right? Isn't that pretty much...
Yeah, but everybody wanted their sort... Like, look at what Kiss did in Ace leaving, and you talked to Ace in the book.
Yes.
But Ace leaving, and then they went and got Vinnie Vincent, who was just shred mania.
Right.
I would go see Kiss back in those days when Vinnie was in the band. They used to physically... not physically, but verbally fight. Alex. Yeah. Calls... Nobody's on the phones. They used to actually fight and argue on stage about Vinny playing too long,
right?
Too many solos. You'd see Paul Stanley turn around and yell at him. I was at Radio City Music Hall on the Lick It Up tour, and Vinny would just keep shredding, and Paul would try to get him to stop because the whole Van Halen shred world was happening,
right?
And even though that's not what people want to hear in Kiss, they all felt the need to try to keep up. And then Kiss went another step further, and they went and hired Mark St. John,
right?
Shred Mania,
yeah.
So then here comes Bruce, and he's kind of caught, I think, probably in a place where it's like, okay, I'm really not that kind of player, but everybody needs a little of that in the '80s, and
right.
It was kind of a weird spot for him, I think.
Yeah, because Bruce Kulick has a good quote in this where he said he'll listen back to tapes from the Lick It Up tour, and he hears stuff that Vinnie Vincent is playing on a song like Colgin, and it has nothing to do with Colgin. Like, it has nothing at all to what like Ace was doing, and yeah, so I guess there's a time and a place for that type of solo.
Yeah. We'll take, if you guys want to jump in, take a couple questions for Greg, talking about his book, Shredders, and all these great guitar players that he talks to. Again, Alex Lifeson of Rush did the foreword, which is amazing. The number, again, is 844-686-5863. 844-6-VOLUME is the phone number. And a few more things here before we wrap up and maybe grab a call or two. And again, Dave Menichetti, speaking of brilliant guitar players, is going to join us coming up in a little bit. A guy that I see comes up in your book a lot is Steve Lynch from Autograph.
Right.
And Steve Lynch was a guy that I think had a big impact. Like him, Steve Lynch. Talk a little bit about Steve Lynch if you can, and his. Because Autograph, honestly, they were kind of a take it or leave it band for me.
Right.
But a lot of people thought what Steve Lynch was doing was kind of groundbreaking at some point, right?
Yeah, he was supposedly doing the two-hand tapping thing similar to Van Halen before the Van Halen 1 album came out. But the thing is, he wasn't in like a band or didn't have any albums out at that point when Van Halen 1 came out. So everyone just assumed that it was Eddie Van Halen that perfected that whole two-handed tapping thing. But what happened is Steve Lynch at that time was working on books called, I forgot what the name of the book was, but it was a book that taught guitarists how to do two-handed tapping. And he was working on that prior to the first Van Halen album coming out. But it unfortunately did not come out until after the first Van Halen album came out. And what's interesting is Autograph opened up for Van Halen on the 1984 tour, and Steve Lynch was doing two-handed tapping, and he was told by Van Halen's management to knock it off, that supposedly Eddie Van Halen doesn't like you ripping off his shtick. And
wow.
He was like, all right, well, he had to cut it out, but meanwhile, he could have been the first person that really was doing it.
Right,
so
right.
That must have been a kind of a bitter pill to swallow.
I bet. And speaking of the tapping thing, another guy, again, interviewed in the book, that did something that was, at the time, blew people's mind, was Jeff Watson in Night Ranger.
Right.
Because I think in Don't Tell Me You Love Me, he does, and I'm not a musician, so I just know what I see and whatever, but he did like an 8-finger thing.
8-finger tapping, yeah.
Which nobody had really done before, right?
Right, yeah. I think he saw what people like Van Halen were doing. And see, now this is the difference now. I give someone like Jeff Watson credit because it seems like, and you could tell me if you agree with this, the majority of new metal bands and guitarists coming out aren't necessarily trying to put their own unique spin on something. They're just kind of copying what's already out there. Whereas, say, someone like Jeff Watson sees what is popular and says, all right, let me sit down in woodshed and try to come up with like a unique kind of spin on it. And he comes up with something called the 8-finger tapping thing. So, I'm just curious to get your feedback. Do you see most new metal bands just being very same sounding at this point in the year 2017?
Yeah, well, I think production-wise, and a lot of it's very redundant to me. I just, for me, like I appreciate all this guitar playing, but I revert back to what you said when we first started talking, and that is, give me a song.
Right.
You got to have a song.
Right.
And I also have to have a vocal that I like.
What about, tell me if this sounds familiar, Metallica riff, melodic singing, Phil Anselmo growl, Iron Maiden type harmony solo, Metallica riff, a growl, melodic solo, fade out. Is that kind of the formula of what most...
Now?
Yeah. I mean, right, isn't that pretty much what you hear? I mean, can't we just be honest? Or,
yeah, I mean, yeah. I guess you could say that. I mean, you could. I mean, a lot of it is... a lot of it lacks, to me, dynamics.
But what I just don't understand is you think about any classic metal band, any kind of classic rock band that's really respected, it's because they put their own unique spin on it. And I don't understand why new bands don't realize that more often. Like, how come they just can't realize, all right, well, we were influenced by this band, this band, and this band. Let's use that as a building block, and now let's try to inject our own personality into it or something that's a little different.
I think it's so hard for these guys to break through these days. It's so hard that if they see something or recognize anybody out there that's getting anywhere and getting any traction and getting any airplay and getting any acceptance, they just jump on that train really quick. It's too hard. You know, what I like a lot is I like the sort of retro movement, if you will, where these guys are going, like a band like Rival Sons, going back to an old school sort of sound, where guitar player like Scott Holiday in that band, I mean, he's not a shredder, but man, when he hits a note, it says something, it means something.
Yeah,
I love all these shred guys. I mean, you talk to Ace Frehley in the book. I mean, Ace is not a guy that anybody would ever put in a shred category, but he had a huge influence on these guys, because with Ace, I think a 15-second solo was a song within the song.
Again,
you hummed his solos.
Right. Again, it's similar to Brian May, or also David Gilmour from Pink Floyd. He does a solo that you could actually sing the melody to. And the thing with Ace Frehley, though, he's not necessarily thought of a shredder soloist, but the song Rocket Ride, I think that solo could be considered a shred.
Yeah, there's moments where he gets into that space, I guess, a little bit. But those guys, I mean, listen to a solo like in Firehouse by Kiss. I mean, it's just a little picking thing, but it sticks in your head like glue. It totally fits and is a cool thing.
Right.
And I think that's what made that in the theatrics, of course, which made him such an influence. Right. Let's get a couple quick phone calls on for Greg. Again, the book is called Shredders, and this is Benji in North Carolina. Go ahead, Benji.
Hey guys, you just mentioned Jeff Watson, and it reminded me of their other guitar player, Brad Gillis, too. Man, he was the first that I can remember in the solo for "Don't Tell Me You Love Me." At the end of it, he's got this tremolo flicking thing that they always called it, like the cricket sound or whatever. That's what the guitar manufacturers would call it, and that became a huge thing for I don't know how long.
I call Brad, and Brad is a friend, and I love Brad, and I love his playing as well. And I call Brad the king of the whammy bar, because I've never seen anybody get more out of a whammy bar than Brad Gillis, and he still is a master at it. And the Night Ranger is still an unbelievable band. Jeff Watson isn't in it anymore. Kerry Kelly is the current other guitar player, but they're both great players. And I was thank you, Benji, for the call. I'm running late on time. I got to run, but for me, I'll never forget seeing Don't Tell Me You Love Me from Night Ranger in the video come on, and those guys trading off solos and just blazing. I thought that was next level stuff for the early 80s. I thought that was amazing. And a great song.
Yep, I agree. And you're going to be speaking today to Dave Medichetti, you said, right?
Yeah.
Ask
in a
him
few
about,
minutes.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the right time or place, but if you have some time at the end, ask him about how Ozzy wanted him to replace Brad Gillis in the Ozzy band because Ozzy did not like Brad Gillis' stage presence.
Oh, is that so?
It's talked about in the book. It's discussed in the book Shredders. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, Brad has told me a lot about his time in there, but I thought Brad was cool on stage. What the hell was there?
He was my for me and a lot of my friends. That was the introduction to Ozzy and also Black Sabbath, because that was right when
Speak of the Devil
MTV came out, and our first exposure to that was the Iron Man live clip.
Right.
And we all thought Brad Gillis was fantastic. In fact, we were disappointed when we heard that he left. But of course, we loved Jakey Lee, but at the time, we didn't understand.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, that was a ballsy move by Brad, because he was committed to Night Ranger, and he knew that he would always just be a hired gun in Aussie land.
Right.
So he said, I got this band with my buddies, and I'm going to give it a shot and take it for a ride and see if we can get somewhere.
Right.
Thank God Night Ranger became successful. Imagine if they didn't,
Right.
and you didn't take the Aussie gig because of, a commitment to a band that didn't make it. Thankfully, they made it. All right, looks like Dave Menichetti is calling us right now, so we've got to transition over to that and talk to him. Unfortunately, some sad news in the world of rock over the weekend with Y&T's guitar player Joey Alves passing away at the age of just 63. So we'll spend some time talking with Dave about that and maybe a couple other things. He'll join us right after the break that we have coming up. So let's take that now, and best of luck to you with this book, Greg. Really enjoyed it. Again, you can meet Greg and get a copy of your book signed this Wednesday.
Right.
And that is at Sam Ash.
Actually, the
book's out Wednesday.
Yeah, the book is called Shredders. That comes out Wednesday. You can get that on Amazon.com. And then I'm having an appearance Thursday at Huntington, New York. It is at the Sam Ash, and that's at 7 p.m. It's right across the street from Walt Whitman Mall, and Mark Wood, the heavy metal violinist, will be there performing as well.
Check out the book. I'm serious, you guys. I know a lot of my audience. I know what you guys like, and you will really enjoy this. Again, it's called Shredders. Order it on Amazon. Get it anywhere books are sold. And it's just a who's who of guitar players doing interviews with Greg about the history of shred guitar playing. Very, very some cool pictures in there as well. Great shot of Eddie Van Halen on the cover. Thanks, man. Good luck with the book, and look forward to all your books. Thank you.
And also great finally meeting you face to face.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
Greg and I, he's had me in some of his books. We've talked many times, but we never met. Yeah, six books.
6 books.
My God, they're going to be sick of hearing from me. So thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Good luck with the book. We got to take a break. We'll come right back and be joined by Dave Menichetti of Y&T.
Trunk Nation returns in a moment.
On volume. Sirius XM 106.